Okay, so I think we'll begin. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, a Spanish interpreter will be here available to interpret live today throughout today's session. To listen to today's, I'm sorry, let me pull up my instructions just so that you can follow along to today's session. All right, here we go. So to listen to today's program in Spanish, simply click on the interpretation button located at the bottom of your screen and select the Spanish channel. So I'll give you a few minutes to do, a few seconds to do that before we move on. Okay, and I will also be providing these instructions throughout the session in the chat box. So those will also be available in the chat box. Great, so we will begin. Welcome everyone. My name is Amy Sam. I am the Health Education Project Specialist at the Maxwell and Eleanor Blum Patient Family Learning Center. I also have my Blum colleagues here for support, so if you want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Mariam Daib. I'm also a health educator here at the Blum Center.
And my name is Kimberly Mankus, and I'm also a health educator along with Mariam at the Blum Center.
Great. So today's program is a special collaboration between the Blum Center and Mass General Hospital for Children. Before we begin, just wanted to go over a few things. Please be aware that today's session is being recorded for educational purposes. If you're interested in viewing the recording, it'll be available later on our Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Everyone is in listen-only mode. This is to help prevent any background noise so that we can hear our guest speakers today. If you have any questions, please use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen. Only the Blum Center staff, co-host, and guest speakers will see your questions, which we'll address at the end of the session. Please do not share any personal medical information or questions in the chat box. If you have a medical question, please ask your doctor. Next, I am going to introduce you to Brianna Beckfold. She is the project manager and editor for Mass General Hospital for Children, and she is going to introduce you all to today's guest speakers.
Thank you, Amy. So good afternoon. I hope you're all doing well, and thank you for coming to this virtual session of the MGHfC Parenting Series, where experts share their knowledge with patients, family, and staff on various pediatric health topics. This year, we're co-hosting the series with the Blum Patient and Family Learning Center at Mass General. And as Amy said, my name is Brianna Beckfold, and I'm a project manager and editor at Mass General Hospital for Children, which is the pediatric branch of Mass General. So today we have 3 experts from the Living Tobacco-Free program at Mass General and MGHfC who share the dangers of vaping, the intersection between vaping and marijuana use, and the most current updates on COVID-19 and vaping. And as we know, COVID-19 is a rapidly changing topic that we learn more about every day. So what our speakers present today is what we currently know now, but keep in mind that it could change at any point in the future. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. We have today Jonina Gorenstein, who's the program manager of the Living Tobacco-Free program in the MGH Center for Community Health Improvement. The program helps people quit smoking, vaping, and using other tobacco products. They also work to keep the next generation tobacco-free. The program serves people in Mass General and MGHfC health centers in Charlestown.
Salud, también en Charlestown, Chelsea, Everett y Riviera. Tenemos también a Susan Giarratani y Catherine, que ambas ayudan a las metas de las personas a dejar de fumar. Nuestras presentadoras hoy van a presentarse hasta las 12:45, donde vamos a abrir a ese punto.
We'll hand it off to our speakers.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. I've been having some trouble with my sound, so if people have trouble hearing me, please do chat in, and I hope someone will give me the signal. So I'm going to just take a moment to start my slideshow, and we'll get started. But first I have to share my screen. Okay, so let's do that. My apologies. Okay, I am now screen sharing, and I am hopefully going to be able to set up my slideshow. Okay, here I go. Thank you for your patience. So I am here to talk to you about what youth are vaping and what you should know and what you can do. And we'll be talking about vaping nicotine, and we'll also be talking about vaping marijuana. We'll be covering the basics, including the harms and the convergence of the two activities. We'll also be talking about 2020 developments specific to vaping. And this is supposed to say the new state law, and we'll talk about COVID-19. And then I'll turn you over to Catherine and Susan, where they'll talk about how to talk with your children about vaping and what kind of resources there are out there to help you. So let's talk about vaping marijuana. Vaping nicotine. We'll talk about the devices, how they work, and what's in them. First, one basic thing I want to call your attention to is that all of these devices are actually electronic cigarettes. They all work in pretty much the basic same way. They all have a heating element, which is powered by a battery. And that battery activates the heating element, which then heats up this liquid in this tank. And when people inhale at the mouthpiece, they're inhaling an aerosol. It's not water vapor. There is no water in this liquid. And this type of device is called a tank type device. A new device that became very, very prevalent over the past few years is a Juul. And this is called a pod system e-cigarette. And the liquid in here is packed right into this little pod, is what it's called. But like the tank type, it has a heating element, and it has a battery, and it has the liquid right at the top, and it's all packed in. And again, all of these sorts of devices are also e-cigarettes used for vaping nicotine. So what's in the liquid that is turned into an aerosol when someone inhales? In that liquid, in the pod or in the tank, we have nicotine, which is the exact same addictive chemical that is found in cigarettes. We have a substance called propylene glycol, and sometimes we also have glycerin. And then historically, there have been flavorings. And the last count that I knew about was that there have been 15,500 flavorings on the marketplace. And we have everything from strawberry, as you see here, to, this was the original Juul flavored set. I think it had cool cucumber and mango and some other things. There is no water. When a person inhales, they're inhaling an aerosol. So we have to ask, well, what are the harms of inhaling that aerosol? One of the things is that in that aerosol, we have particulates. There are solids suspended in this air that comes into the lungs. We also have carcinogenic substances like formaldehyde, nitrosamines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and we also have these things called volatile organic compounds that make asthma worse. One thing you should be absolutely aware of is that nothing, no agency, no state organization regulates what is in these, what is in the vape juice. And that is means that nobody is protecting your children. So what other kinds of harms we have? We have harms to the developing brain. First of all, we know that nicotine is addictive. It mimics what's called acetylcholine, which is a brain transmitter, a neurotransmitter in the brain. So once nicotine comes into your brain, it pretends it's acetylcholine, and then it triggers a release of dopamine. And that's the chemical that makes a person feel good. And when a person inhales that nicotine and that dopamine is released, the brain says, hey, I like this, and give me more. And the more a person has of that nicotine going to his or her brain, it actually changes the way brain connections are formed, particularly in an adolescent brain. The use, what's really disturbing is that when you're using nicotine in adolescence, it can also increase the risk of future addiction to other drugs like cocaine and heroin, because those drugs, just like nicotine, trigger the release of dopamine in the brain. And I should just add that it takes about nicotine about 8 seconds to actually get from the mouth through the lungs up to the brain. And nicotine, when used repeatedly, can harm parts of the brain that control attention, learning, mood, and impulse control. So just to say another word about addiction, the younger that someone is when he or she starts using tobacco, the more likely he or she will become addicted. And signs of nicotine addiction appear in some youth in as little as 2 weeks after they start using tobacco. In our coaching practice for helping people quit smoking, if you ask a typical person, when did they start smoking? They'll tell you 14 or 15. And it really grabs a person quickly, this nicotine addiction. So what's the last harm? The last harm is that research tells us that if young people start vaping, they have a 3 to 4 times increased risk of starting to smoke deadly regular combustible cigarettes. And that is pretty disturbing. And so just to sum up the harms, we know that there are harms to the lungs. You have these little particulates going into 60,000 tiny bronchioles in your lungs, which end up in a billion tiny alveoli, where air is exchanged into your bloodstream. We also know that nicotine harms the developing brain. It changes how it's wired and how it works. We know it's highly addictive. And we know that youth who vape nicotine are more likely to use cigarettes. So I want to skip a little bit to the Juul phenomenon. It took us by storm in 2017, and most of you are probably familiar with the product. First of all, it was designed to look cool. It looks super cool. It has, it almost looks like the e-cigarette of iPhones. It had flavors. One pod, according to Juul's own website, had the equivalent nicotine of of 1 pack of cigarettes. That's 220 puffs. In my opinion, the only thing I could call it was a nicotine addiction machine that lured youth with flavors. And there it was. And this photo comes from Juul's own website. Here it was, a laptop computer, typical of many children, and you could actually charge the Juul from the USB port. And there it was, and teachers didn't know, no one knew. And there's that little pod that just plugs right in, and you inhale, and you don't even have to push a button. And there it was, nicotine to your brain in 8 seconds. So kaboom. there was a huge explosion in e-cigarette use, specifically powered by Juuls, between 2017 and 2019. So this was actually the spring of 2017, which was before the fall of 2017 when things really took off. At that point, there was a survey done of middle schoolers, and they were asked, have you ever used an e-cigarette, which was the traditional name of a Juul. They were all electronic cigarettes. And only 3% of middle schoolers said yes, and 12% of high schoolers, however, said yes. Fast forward 2 years later, and you see this explosion. 11% of middle schoolers said, sure, I've used an e-cigarette in the last 30 days. And 28% of high school students said, yep, I've used an e-cigarette too in the last 30 days. And again, that was mainly powered by Juul. Now, the good news is that in 2020, it looks like, we hope, the beginning of a trend that's going down. Middle schoolers were down to 5%, high schoolers, 20% were using e-cigarettes specifically in the last 30 days. But a closer look at the data reveals some concern, because large chunks of these middle schoolers and high schoolers who are vaping more than 20 days in a month. And that's cause for concern, because if a person is vaping 20 days in a month, and in some instances every day, we worry about addiction and dependence. And that we don't want to see youth. We don't want to see youth become addicted to nicotine and then take on all of those harms that I talked about. So the impact. Juuls were everywhere. Vaping became widespread. Vaping devices became widespread. And then we discovered, probably in the fall of 2018, that many youth who were vaping nicotine or marijuana were also vaping the other substance. So with that, I'm going to skip to talking about vaping marijuana or cannabis. Now, I should add, we focus on helping people quit tobacco products, nicotine in any form. We are not trained in our program to help people quit cannabis. It's a slightly different lane, but I do need to talk about it because we do see people who are vaping both. So I want to emphasize that when I talk about marijuana or cannabis today, I am talking about THC, marijuana that has THC in it, not CBD. THC and CBD are two what's called cannabinoids, which are part of marijuana. I'm sorry, and there are 66 or more cannabinoids in marijuana. THC is the one that gets a person high. CBD is not the one that gets the person high. So I will be talking, when I use the word marijuana or cannabis or THC, it's really a stand-in for a form of marijuana that gets you high. That's what I'm talking about. So what's the concern? Well, it's really quite interesting, because if you look at all of these devices, they are incredibly similar looking to the vaping devices that are used for nicotine.
Dispositivos que se usa para vapear nicotina.
In fact, it was made by the precursor, the company that preceded the Juul company. And the devices, just like e-cigarettes, are called vapes. Sometimes they're called vape pens. In the case of marijuana, they're sometimes called dab pens. And just like in the case of e-cigarettes, where the language has become vape or vaping, the activity for vaping marijuana is called vaping. So it gets very confusing. And if you ask your child, or anybody asks your child, have you vaped anything in the last month? And your child says yes, well, the follow-up question is what? because vaping now refers to both marijuana and nicotine. The two have really converged. And over here, in the middle here, that is not a bottle of liquid e-juice with flavors. That is a bottle with THC oil in it. And there are many different ways that THC oil or THC can be put into these devices. This is called wax, and this is called shatter. So sometimes when you might see one of these devices, you may or may not know whether it was meant for nicotine, for marijuana, or in some instances, devices can be used for both. So moving on, so what's the issue? The issue is that this slide, to simplify it, says youth are using both. They're vaping both nicotine and marijuana. This slide represents data from a nearby community that, from a survey that was done in 2019. The question that was posed to the youth was, have you vaped anything in the last 30 days? And so youth were then given, if they said yes, a choice. And they could have said they vaped nicotine, they vaped THC, they vaped some liquid with flavor, supposedly without nicotine or THC, or they could simply say, you know, I don't know what I vaped. And what's terrifying and fascinating about this slide is that close to 9% of middle schoolers said, yeah, I vaped something in the last 30 days. But close to half of them, when they vaped, didn't know what they were vaping. They share, they pass it around, they just don't know. A smaller, but still a very significant percentage of students said, yeah, I vaped something, maybe more than one day, and at least on one of those days, it was liquid with flavor, no nicotine, no THC. Well, the truth of the matter is that's what they thought. In reality, most any liquid in any vape has got either THC in it or nicotine. So you have huge numbers of people really not understanding what they are vaping. Some middle schoolers do. These are the ones who understood they were vaping nicotine, and these are the ones who understood they were vaping THC. High schoolers become a little bit more knowledgeable. In this instance, almost half of the high schoolers who said, yeah, I vaped in the last 30 days, and at least one day I know I vaped liquid with THC. And then almost another, more than a third said, yep, I vaped liquid with nicotine. And you have to understand that on some days kids are vaping nicotine, on some days they're vaping THC, and on some days some kids or some youth are vaping both. And that's what this graph represents. It's pretty disturbing. And what makes it more disturbing is when you take a look at marijuana, because the potency, the strength of marijuana has increased drastically in the last 30 years. In the 1990s, if you took a sample of marijuana, the average THC content, is about 3.8% here. So it's about 4%, pretty small. Today, if you take something like THC oil, more than 50% of that is THC, the ingredient that gets you high. And I came across one advertisement that advertised its oil as able to get you higher than you've ever been in your whole life. It's a very, very, very potent and powerful ingredient. And it's very concerning when you think about what is it doing to young people's brains. So marijuana, or THC in all its forms, there are harms. Like nicotine, THC is going to hijack a person's brain. In a sense, it impersonates a neurotransmitter that's already in a person's brain, and it knocks it out of place, and it triggers that release of dopamine. And again, dopamine is that same drug that is very pleasurable and that people like and that people want more of generally. And like nicotine, it can affect changes to the brain structure, how areas are connected within the brain. And the truth of the matter is that people can become addicted or dependent on marijuana. And the research shows that 17% of young people who start using marijuana as teens, or 17% of people who start using marijuana as teens will become addicted. And then, of course, there's the social, emotional impact on life. It can be mental health effects, relationship problems, school problems, and things, social, emotional problems. So a quick summary, we can see how similar the impacts or the potential impacts of nicotine and marijuana are. They can both affect the structure and the function of a developing brain. They can both, when inhaled, harm lungs. We know there are very high levels of nicotine and THC respectively in these chemicals, in these vape juices. And we know they can both cause addiction or dependence. And back in 2017, we knew that 20% of Massachusetts high school students were vaping, and 24% had used marijuana or cannabis, not necessarily vaping, but in some form. So again, kids are ingesting both. So before I turn you over, so that's the risk, those are the concerns, those are the harms of vaping nicotine, vaping marijuana, and then vaping both of them together. And before I turn you over to Susan and Catherine, I just want to quickly talk about some 2020 developments that affect nicotine and tobacco products specifically. The very good news about tobacco products is that Massachusetts passed a law restricting the sale of flavored tobacco products. It is now unlawful, it's against the law, to sell online or for retail sellers to sell, like your corner store, flavored tobacco products to Massachusetts residents. This law covers all kinds of flavored tobacco products, not just jewel pods or pods for similar kinds of system, not just flavored e-juice, but it covers menthol cigarettes because menthol is a flavor, and it covers these strangely flavored mini cigars, and it covers chew, what's called chew of any flavor, and it covers any kind of flavored vaping device in Massachusetts. These devices can only be sold in adult smoking bars, which are only accessible to adults 21 and older for consumption on the premises. There are no exceptions under Massachusetts law. So if you were to walk into a 7-Eleven or a Store 24 or a Cumberland Farm, right now, the only tobacco products you should see are traditional tobacco products like regular Marlboro cigarettes or tobacco flavored chew or tobacco flavored pods, or possibly even these liquid bottles. But I have to just sound a warning, and that is Massachusetts has the strictest flavor restrictions, but we are not an island, and we have other states surrounding us where where the restrictions are not as tough as they are in Massachusetts. So products do come into Massachusetts. People go to New Hampshire and they buy them. And prior to COVID-19, they were being resold in schools. There can be illegal internet sales and other kinds of black market activities. For a while, there was an onslaught of this kind of device. It was a disposable device. They were cheap. They were about $7 a piece. The flavor was supposedly fabulous. And prior to the schools closing down, when kids were afraid of being caught in school bathrooms vaping, they were flushing them down the toilets and causing plumbing problems. Fortunately, the Massachusetts Attorney General and the FDA in the summer cracked down specifically on this manufacturer, Puff Bars and some others. But other products, I have to warn you, continue to find their way in. And just as an example, this is a picture. These are photos of litter picked up on school grounds in September 2020, just a few months ago. So here you can see the array of products that are still coming in. We have, I think these are probably menthol jewel pods. These are disposable flavored devices. This I can read as banana ice. Up here is looks like somebody's custom jewel. These are also wrappers for disposable nicotine e-cigarettes, disposable pod devices that contain nicotine. And as are these, and you get the idea. It's incredibly powerful that Massachusetts has its flavor restrictions. It will restrict access for youth, but products still come in. And we need to be careful and watchful. A couple of last slides before I hand this off to Susan and Catherine. I do want to talk a little bit about vaping and COVID-19. And Brianna quite correctly said, the research is ongoing. This is what we know today, and it can change tomorrow. And I would say this is a this is what we know today. Let's leave it at that. We know that smoking and vaping can damage the lungs, and it can weaken the body's immune system, and it can increase the risk of acquiring COVID-19. We also believe that smoking and vaping may increase the spread of COVID-19, and that's because of the persistent hand-to-mouth contact when you engage in those activities. The CDC has clearly stated on its website, at least as of a couple of weeks ago, that smoking or history of smoking increases the risk of severe illness from COVID-19. We don't have any data, to my knowledge, about whether vaping nicotine products or vaping cannabis products increase that same risk of severe illness. But regardless, it's really important to encourage anybody who vapes or smokes to make every effort to quit. And just really interestingly, there was a study from Stanford University that was published in 2020 that asked a very large group of young people about their history of e-cigarette use and their history of being diagnosed with COVID. And it turned out that the researchers found that young people who had ever used e-cigarettes were 5 to 7 times more likely to have been diagnosed with COVID-19 than those who had not ever used e-cigarettes or Juuls or anything with nicotine in it that's electronic. And then young people who had used both e-cigarettes and conventional cigarettes in the last 30 days were even more at risk. They were almost 7 times more likely to be diagnosed with COVID. Again, the potential explanations: nicotine and the other chemicals in these e-cigarettes that are inhaled through the aerosol can harm lung function, making your lungs more vulnerable to acquiring the disease. And the actual just simple physical behavior of touching your hands and your mouth can increase your risk of spreading it, particularly if youth are sharing. And then, of course, youth share devices. If they're together, they share devices. That's very classic. So I'll be happy to take questions after, but I want to give Susan and Catherine a chance to share their knowledge and information about resources and how to talk to your children. And I am going to just stop sharing so Susan can take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonina. Welcome, everyone. My name is Susan Giarratani. I'm one of the coaches over at the Living Tobacco Free program. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen right now. And just give me 1 second. Perfect. Okay. So my part in this presentation is talking, listening, and helping. So for a parent, the first step is to get informed, and that's what this webinar is, getting your information. Second, you want to try to have a conversation with your child. And I'm going to show you some of the ways to where to begin and what you should, how to start that conversation. And then know your resources. Where are you going to get some help or some information? And Catherine's going to show us later on in the presentation where to get that. So why are conversations important now? Well, like Jonina had showed you in the slides, that most people with substance abuse disorders, they usually initiated some substances before the age of 18. And most of them before the age of 25, before the brain is developed. So, you know, adolescents and young adults whose brains are still developing, there's more of a vulnerability for that person to become addicted to medication, not medications, I'm sorry, marijuana, nicotine, alcohol, and other drugs. So having this conversation is really a preventative to start talking to your middle schoolers and your high schoolers to see where they're at. So that would be the first step. So some tips to begin the conversation. As a coach, I always find that asking permission to begin a conversation with every client that I talk with is a sign of respect and showing them that their time is valuable. So by asking permission, asking your child for permission, can we have this conversation now? It's very helpful because it helps open up that child to, you know, wanting to do it. If the child isn't ready, then ask permission. When can we schedule a talk? I'd really like to have a talk. Also expressing empathy and understanding. This is a difficult conversation to have. Making sure that, you know, you try not to become angry because you're upset that your child is using a vape or using cigarettes. Just showing some empathy and understanding. And now that you know how addictive nicotine is, then you probably will be a little more sympathetic. Having this honest conversation without judgment. I always tell my clients that this conversation is just gathering information. I'm not here to judge you or try to tell you how to do certain things, but I'm going to give you some information and then we can do it together. We can try to help each other together. So by doing that with that honest conversation, you're building that trust level. Opening up that conversation. And then the best way to ask questions are open-ended questions. It helps with the flow of the conversation. It allows you to get more information. And it also is not a way of interrogating your child or showing, you know, having that child become defensive. So it's really a good way to ask some questions. And I will go over some of the questions a little later on. And the next thing that you should watch is body language, not only your own body language, but your child's body language. Is your child rolling their eyes, or you know, are they closed, arms folded? Are you angry and have an angry, you know, way of looking at that child? So you want to make sure that you, it's a very good time you're in a safe space and you're in a, you're at a calm point where you're going to have this conversation. So some messages that you can include would be to make sure that, the majority of kids are not smoking THC or nicotine like Jonina showed you. So sometimes kids might say, but everybody's doing it, Mom. All my friends are doing it. So if that's the case, if that's what they're saying, maybe it's because it's a signal that this child's feeling a little peer pressure, or the child might, think that everybody's doing it. So this would be a good time to think, is my child trying to fit into this crowd? Asking those questions. Do you feel some pressure to do this, to vape? And that might open up a line of communication. Also know that a lot of times I hear from clients and they say, well, vaping is much more safer than cigarettes. And we don't know that for sure. We do know the chemicals that are in the vapes, but safer doesn't not mean it's not safe. So being aware of all the chemicals that are in there over a long period of time, we really don't know. We'll have to find out how safe this actually is. And then the contents of that are in the vapes are not regulated by the FDA. So how do they feel about being a guinea pig, about trying and not really knowing how safe this product is out there? And the last thing is advertisers. So advertisers are focusing on the next generation of new customers. What they're doing, like Jonina showed you, those those colorful, fruity flavors are enticing kids. If you look at the advertising on Facebook and Instagram and all other social media, it looks like it's real cool. It's it's easy. It's wonderful. So making sure that you know that, and that your child knows that. So some open-ended questions. These are questions that don't respond to a yes or no. So asking your client, asking your child, so what do you think you know about vapes? What's interesting about them? What do you think are inside these vapes? So by doing that, asking these questions, finding out where their likes are, what their dislikes are, where do they use it? Do they use it in school? Do they use it at home? Your thoughts on cutting down or quitting. So those things might be helpful. Those questions might be helpful to get the answers. And then if you feel like you don't know how you can talk to your child, there are also referrals to social workers, nurses, school-based health centers, and other resources. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to allow Catherine to go over the resources and other cool things that could help a parent out.
Thanks so much. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen so we can go over that and have time for questions. So Jonina and Susan set this up very well. But how do you know if your child's vaping? If you're thinking of having this dialogue, and how will that go, right? So Jonina did a really good job of giving an overview of what these devices look like, what these pods could look like. So now you know what kind of the paraphernalia of vaping, what it looks like. Some unusual items that might be happening. If you smell a fruity smell that maybe isn't the kid's body spray or anything like that, it's just a very unusual smell coming from their room or the bathroom, that's a good indicator of flavoring that's in these devices. Some other physical attributes that you could start seeing in youth is they're a little more irritable, nervous, restless, or anxious. Obviously, we have to look at their stage in life with adolescents and young adults. That could be the normal flow of things. Maybe they are nervous about an exam, but maybe it's more so than usual. Increased drinking of water and other liquids because they just constantly have a dry mouth, frequent nosebleeds, there's weight loss. Those are some physical attributes we can start seeing in youth if they're using a vape for nicotine. Unusual charges if the youth has access to a debit or credit card is also another indicator. Something that's become a little more popular over the years is also using a phone to send money to people, like a program called Venmo or Zelle. Those are ways that people can send money via a bank account or credit card, and you can kind of see those charges and maybe ask where they're going to. And another indicator is caffeine consumption may increase as well. Nicotine is a stimulant, which means that it kind of helps you focus and concentrate. So if a child maybe hasn't had access to their vape for nicotine and they're feeling a little groggy, you know, caffeine helps with that, right? Also, caffeine and nicotine are traditionally, they bond well as far as flavoring goes. So those are some indicators on if you have suspicions that your child is vaping nicotine. So that brings us to some free resources for quitting nicotine. So there's our program, Mass General's Living Tobacco Free program. We do offer one-on-one coaching. Susan indicated this with primary care referrals, right? So in addition to social workers and school-based health centers and nurses, your primary care doctors are also very good. There's a program called the Truth Initiative, which the website is right here for you to see, and they have a texting program on phones. And what you do is you text Vape Free Mass at 88709, and it provides, you know, automated messages for the youth to go through. And then there's a website called My Life, My Quit that provides options for texting as well. But it also provides access through smartphone and online. You can text right there. You can see the website. There's also an option to have a chat here. As you can see online, here and here. There's an option to start a quit, which kind of takes someone through the path of what that could look like, right? And another aspect of this website that's really great, especially for parents, is the resource center. There's a lot of really great resources that could go into more depth than what we could cover today. But again, the biggest thing that I want to harp on is these are all free resources. You don't just get to use one. You can use as many as you'd like, right? We actually encourage that. We are not a one-stop shop, right? If you're talking to Susan, Jonina, or I through Mass General's Living Tobacco Free, of course, encouraging a client to use My Life, My Quit and other resources that are available is encouraged. And then some additional substance use resources available is the MGH ARMS program, which specializes in supporting adolescents and young adults and their parents as they deal with substance use and related problems. And their phone number is there. And another is the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is a really awesome resource for gathering more information for parents and teens on tobacco, nicotine, marijuana, and other substances. So in addition to using resources, it's great to have information, it's great to have support, but then there's also some activity that needs to happen, right? When someone uses a substance, it tends to be a coping skill. It gets associated with stress relief and comfort. So in addition to using those, it's really great to start modeling and practicing and encouraging some changes in that area. Such as, you know, when someone gets stressed, you know, exercising, maybe talking to support and friends, writing in a journal, writing a song, right? Really tapping into those coping skills that have maybe been replaced by vaping. We could all use some new stress coping skills these days. So any way that a parent could also model that for a kid is really beneficial individually and as a family. So with that being said, I just wanted to put up our contact information right here. Again, Jonina was our program manager. Susan and I are the coaches, and there's our contact information. It's been a delight to present this to you all. We hope to hear from you soon, and we'll open it up for questions now.
We have one question that's coming through right now. While that person types, another question. Could my kids be vaping upstairs and I don't even know it? So whoever wants to answer that, go right ahead.
So I can take that over. Yes. That, you know, we kind of went over it. We wanted to show you all the different devices and the different pods and what they could look like. But the reality of it is that when e-cigarettes came out, when vape started when it started to be very apparent that they were targeting kids, a lot of these devices, if you saw, you know, the Juul, for example, looks like a USB that kids could use to bring to school back and forth with their homework, their presentations. There's some that look like pens, right? They look like they're very slender and you could put them right in with your highlighters and pens. And then the little pods can look like a smaller, you know, something that connects for your wireless keyboard and mouse, right? So they're very sneaky with that. So without targeting maybe some fear, what it is what we wanted to do is provide information, awareness of what these things look like, some common ways that could be indicators that a kid could be going through withdrawal or is using a substance. But the biggest thing is maybe that smell, like the fruity smells, the different smells that could be coming is a good indicator as well.
Great. We have another question. How can a parent support their child if they do vape and they're experiencing withdrawal symptoms?
I'll take that one. I would say the first thing you should really do is to consult with your pediatrician. There is no evidence base for using traditional, what's called nicotine replacement therapies that we use with adults to help someone quit smoking. However, and that's not because nicotine replacement therapies are necessarily dangerous. That's because we don't have enough research. So your doctor needs to be an educated doctor. And if that doctor evaluates your child and hears about those withdrawal symptoms, that doctor may very well prescribe for that child nicotine replacement therapy. It is not available over the counter for anybody under 18. It is only available by prescription, and it's definitely something you should consult your doctor about. And then you can use other resources like the coaching resources, either through us or through the texting program or the chatting program, to offer additional support. Because for adults, the model is if you offer support and some assistance, medical assistance in mitigating or lessening withdrawal symptoms, a person has a much better chance of succeeding in quitting smoking.
Great.
Good. I'm glad that you've got a call into your pediatrician.
Great. Well, those are helpful. Does anyone else have any other questions? I don't see anything else coming through, but yeah, we have a bunch of thank yous. But with that, oh, Jonina, did you want to say something?
I just want to encourage parents to use the resources. Go on the websites, particularly in the parent education site. They're really terrific resources. And of course, you can always call us. I don't know if we put our phone number down, but our program line is 781-485-6210, and I will put it in the chat. 781-485-6210. There we go. And I have to press enter. There we go. And that's our program line. And we'll be happy to point you to resources and answer questions.
Great. With that, I don't see any other questions coming through. So I think we can wrap up a few minutes early and give people, 5 extra minutes. All right, thank you, everyone.